Well, W.B. Yeats, as a poet, was born in the year 1865 and left heavenly abode in the year 1939. Yeats laid the foundations of the Irish literary movement in collaboration with Lady Gregory, Saint, and others. He wrote two fine poetic dramas, The Countess Kathleen and The Land of Heart's Desire. His most popular collection of lyrics were poems in 1895 and The Wind Among the Reeds 1899. He continued to produce lyrics as well as plays after 1901, and his later poems in 1922 show an increase of poetic power and a deepening of intellectual quality. Yeats is a fastidious poet, writing little and revising often. As a consequence, the average merit of his poetry is very high. He is a great artist, and his mastery of technique is seen in such perfect lyrics as The Lake Isle of Innisfree, When You're Old, The Sorrow of Love, Dawn by the Sally Gardens, The Fiddler of Dunay, and A Dream of Death. Ward has said about his Innisfree poem, few modern poems can have had so much artistry lavished on them as the Lake Isle of Innisfree. As a young man, Yeats drew on concrete images to enrich his poetry. He noted and affectionately described the sights and sounds of nature, but these grew fewer as he advanced in years. He no longer watched mice in the barley sheaves and the bubbles in a frozen pond. It appears as if he paced upon the mountains overhead and hid his face among a crowd of stars. He was carried away by dreams, by theosophy, by Eastern mysticism. He might be likened to the human child led away by the fairies of whom he speaks in The Stolen Child. Away with us he is going, the solemn eyed, away from a world more full of weeping than he can understand. The difference is manifest when we compare a poem like The Falling of the Leaves and add he wishes for the close of heaven. In the second poem, he leaves the familiar earth and waves a magnificent tapestry, borrowing all the colors of the heavens. But the atmosphere is too rarefied. He himself warns us, I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread lightly because you tread on my dreams. No doubt there is an increase of occasional magnificence, but that he does not make up for the loss of touch with natural things. The lake of the lake of Innisfree, the lake Isle of Innisfree affects a compromise between concrete picturizing and dreamlike imagining. All the little concrete details are present in the poet's mind, and at the same time, the poet breathes the pathos and longing that are generally regarded as typical of the Celtic spirit. When he wrote this poem, Yeats had freed himself from the metrical regularity he had observed in his earlier poems, and he now gave attention to securing a rhythmical basis which should allow scope for natural speech trees. In his later years, Yeats moved more and more outside his world of fancy and came into closer contact with reality. In one of his poems of his middle period, he said, I am worn out with dreams, a memorable fragment of self criticism. Indeed, he must have thoroughly wearied of being cited as a poet of the Lake Isle of Innisfree. The generality of readers regarded him as poetic in the lowest sense of the term. He was expected always to go on longing for nine beans rose and the rose in his heart to blossom. They were quite taken aback by the new Yeats who moved with the times. In The Man Who Dreamed of Fairyland, Yeats realized that a man is always being distracted by a world outside his own. In a period in which he felt chaos was supreme, how could anyone only play with dreams, though for him dreams were far more comprehensive than most people can understand? As he realized that a time has come when things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. He began to distrust romanticism more and more. Yeats believed that all men will more and more reject the opinion that poetry is a criticism of life and be more and more convinced that it is the revelation of a hidden life. This remark helps to explain the presence of symbolism and mysticism in his poetry. But he was broad minded enough to have both sympathy and understanding for the younger generation of poets whose ideals were so different from those of his own youth. This can be seen in the preface he wrote to the Oxford Book of Modern Verse. In the poems of his last years, the vigor of his mind and senses is unimpaired, and it is in revolt against the enfeeblement of his body. His progress as a lyrical poet might be gauged from a comparison of the initiatory poem with a more complex one, Byzantium, published in 1930. It was a harder quality of beauty in his poems of the last phase that aligned with him with the poets of the New Age. Yeats gave a new mythology to English poetry, the Celtic. His style also has the usual Celtic peculiarities, a meditative and a melancholy beauty, a misty idealism, and a sweet and dignified diction. Thank you.